You ever wake up to find out your lake's been stolen? Because I did. I'm Everett Rylan. I'm a retired contractor, live out in a quiet cul-de-sac on the edge of a private lake I specifically bought into 15 years ago. The lake's technically on my deed outlined crystal clear in the property lines. Always has been. Always will be. Or so I thought. Then came Dolores Jenkins. Bleach blonde bob, clipboard fused to her hand like it was surgically attached, and a voice that could cut glass. She got herself elected HOA president last fall after the previous one had a stroke and stepped down. Since then, she's been on a mission to beautify the neighborhood, which apparently means control everything that moves. I was out back staining the dock when she came goose stepping down my gravel path like she owned it. She didn't even say hello, just jabbed a finger toward the lake behind me. This water feature is now communal property under HOA jurisdiction, she announced. I blinked. You mean my lake? It's adjacent to multiple properties. That makes it shared access, she said, flipping a stapled printout like it was gospel. I wiped my hands on a rag. Look, Dolores, that lake's on my parcel. It's in the deed. You can't just decide it's communal. She pursed her lips. Everett, don't be difficult. The board voted. We'll be putting in a small gazebo and kayak rack next week. It's going to raise everyone's property values. I nearly choked. You're planning construction on my land without even asking me. It's not your land anymore, it's ours. Read the bylaws. I didn't even answer, just turned and walked inside before I said something I'd regret. I pulled out my deed clear as day. The lake is fully enclosed within my property lines. No easements, no shared access. Just me. So I called the county recorder's office. The clerk confirmed everything. Dolores had submitted a revised plat map that attempted to redraw the boundaries without any legal review, just a fake stamp and a board vote. Not only was it invalid, it was criminal. I could have gone straight to the cops, but I had a better idea. That night, I went to the hardware store and picked up a heavy-duty chain-link gate, installed it at the top of the gravel drive that leads around to the water, cemented the posts deep. No HOA handyman was gonna budge it. Then I hung the sign. Private HOA access, $500 per visit, cash only. No refunds. By morning, the neighborhood Facebook page was a war zone, and Dolores. She showed up by noon with her usual two goons, Terry and Linda from the compliance committee. You can't do this, she shrieked, stabbing at the sign like it personally offended her. I leaned against the gate, arms folded. Why not? I'm just giving your HOA what it wants, access. You want it? Price is $500 each time, cash up front. You're extorting the neighborhood. No, I said, you're trespassing. This is private property. You submitted a fake map to claim what isn't yours. That's fraud, but I'm being generous. I'm offering access at a premium. She stormed off, red-faced and sputtering. That night, someone tried to cut the lock on the gate, but I'd already installed a trail cam and the footage. Let's just say Dolores was gonna have a hard time explaining why she was sneaking around in dark clothes with bolt cutters. By sunrise, I had already emailed the trail cam footage to Deputy Coleman's small town guy with a big sense of humor and a zero-tolerance policy for HOA nonsense. He called me back by breakfast. Everett, he said, you got any idea who that shadowy figure with bolt cutters might be? Could be the president of a certain neighborhood dictatorship, I said, flipping bacon on the stove. But I'll let the footage speak for itself. Already did, he chuckled. That gate's on your property. We verified the coordinates. You want to press charges? I want her stopped. You do what you gotta do. He did. By noon, a cruiser rolled down my gravel path. Dolores was at the bottom of my driveway before the tires even stopped crunching. She had on her best pillar of the community cardigan and a fresh folder under her arm, like she thought she could talk her way out of anything. Deputy Coleman stepped out, one hand on his belt, the other holding a printed screenshot from my trail cam. He didn't even glance at her folder. Ma'am, you mind explaining what you were doing on Mr. Ryland's property at 2:46 this morning? Her eyes flicked to me, then back to him. I was checking for code violations. There's a restriction against unauthorized fencing. Coleman raised an eyebrow. You were checking for fencing violations in the dark with bolt cutters. I wasn't carrying bolt cutters. He held up the photo. That you? That's not proof. That could be anyone. We pulled your phone ping. You were at the coordinates of this camera at the same time. He took out a citation pad. You're being charged with attempted trespassing, vandalism, and destruction of private property. You'll need to appear in county court next month. She tried to protest, but he was already handing her the summons. Her face twitched like she wanted to scream but didn't know which direction to aim it in. After she left, Coleman leaned against his cruiser and scratched his chin. You sure know how to stir up a hornet's nest, Rylan. Wasn't me that brought the hornet, I said. I just locked the nest. That should have been the end of it, but Dolores wasn't done. The next week, I noticed a new sign posted at the entrance of our neighborhood. HOA Special Assessment Due Lakefront Improvement Initiative. I checked the notice board near the mail kiosk. They were demanding $2,000 from every homeowner for communal water feature upgrades. The notice claimed the funds were for benches, a floating dock, and a shared-use kayak launch. I wasn't the only one furious. My neighbor Claudia, a retired nurse with a fondness for gardening and zero tolerance for nonsense, was already snapping photos of the notice with her phone. They can't do this, she said. The lake isn't even theirs. You proved that. I thought I did, I said. But apparently they're betting on everyone else not knowing better. That night, I printed a dozen copies of my parcel map showing the lake entirely within my property lines. I tacked them up next to the HOA notice, along with a bold sign. This lake is privately owned. Any HOA assessments related to it are fraudulent. By morning, someone had ripped them down, so I went digital. I built a simple website like Gate FaxNet and uploaded the deed, the official map, and a video of me walking the property line with a licensed surveyor. I included a copy of the county clerk's letter verifying the boundary. Then I posted the link on every neighborhood forum, Facebook group, and Nextdoor thread I could find. It caught fire. Within 48 hours, at least a dozen homeowners had emailed the HOA demanding the assessment be rescinded. A few threatened to report them for financial misconduct. One guy, a quiet engineer who'd never spoken at a meeting before, offered to file a formal complaint with the State Homeowners Association Oversight Board. That's when the anonymous letters started showing up, typed. No return address, folded in half and slid under doors or taped to mailboxes. If you continue to interfere with HOA management decisions, further legal action will be taken. You are creating division in the community. Cease and desist immediately. This behavior is being documented and will affect your standing in future neighborhood initiatives. I brought them to Deputy Coleman, who took one look and said, "Classic intimidation tactic." But they're dumb enough to leave printer ink codes on the paper. Turns out, most modern printers embed forensic dots in every page. Coleman had a buddy at the state crime lab pull the serial number. Guess what printer it matched? The one in the HOA clubhouse. The same clubhouse that Dolores had the only access code to. That gave Coleman the green light to investigate misuse of HOA funds. He got a warrant and seized the HOA's financial records, which is when the real mess started unraveling. Turns out, not only were they charging for lakefront improvements they had no right to authorize, but they'd also been siphoning off money from other assessments for years. Landscaping budgets that didn't match invoices, maintenance fees that never reached contractors, and a security patrol that existed only on paper. Coleman called me a week later. "You sitting down?" he asked, standing on the dock, actually. "Well, sit. We're recommending charges to the county DA embezzlement, fraud, and forgery. And Dolores isn't the only one going down. Her whole compliance committee was in on it. Linda and Terry. Yup. We even found a fake invoice from a landscaping company registered to Terry's nephew. I turned around and looked at the lake, calm, still, just the way I liked it. So what now? Now, he said, the county steps in. An interim fiduciary will manage HOA operations until a new board's elected. And they'll be under audit for the next 5 years. The following week, a county-hired property law specialist held a town hall at the community rec center. Everyone showed up standing room only. The auditor went over the findings in detail, projected on a big screen. Every misused dollar, every forged vote, every false assessment was laid bare. Dolores sat in the back, stone-faced, knowing full well she was done. When the floor opened for questions, Claudia raised her hand. "Can we put in a motion to dissolve the HOA?" The specialist nodded. "If 75% of the residents sign a petition, yes. The process takes about 6 months. Petition sheets were passed around before the meeting even ended. By the time I left, over half the room had already signed. People were hugging, laughing, making plans to finally repaint their shutters without begging permission. As for me, I took down the $500 sign, not because I had to, because I didn't need it anymore. The gate stays, though, just in case anyone forgets who owns the lake. It didn't take long for the dust to settle, long enough, though, for the neighborhood to start breathing again without Dolores' clipboard tyranny lurking around every bush. The petition to dissolve the HOA gained traction like a runaway freight train. Claudia coordinated with the county's legal liaison, and within 3 weeks, we had the required signatures and then some. Folks who never waved before were suddenly exchanging phone numbers, coordinating potlucks, and asking each other how they could pitch in. The HOA's interim fiduciary, a lean, no-nonsense woman named Marisol Tran, was appointed by the county to manage the final stages of the audit and transition. She had the posture of someone who'd spent 20 years in courtrooms and the eyes of someone who missed nothing. The first time she visited my property, she showed up unannounced but respectful, clipboard in hand. Not to claim anything but to verify my documentation for the official dissolution package. "You ever at Rylan?" she asked, stepping onto the gravel with a quiet nod. "That's me." "And the lake's still mine, if that's what you're wondering." She didn't smile. "I read the files. I'm here to confirm the parcel markers for the record. County's formalizing everything into the dissolution order. We want no disputes down the line." I led her around the perimeter while she logged GPS data into her tablet. We didn't speak much until she stopped near the old dock and turned to face me. "You know," she said, "this isn't the first time I've seen an HOA president try to rewrite property lines. But it's the first time the scheme involved money laundering through fake landscaping companies." I raised an eyebrow. "You're saying this goes deeper than just the assessments?" She tapped a few notes into her tablet. "The county traced several payments from the HOA account to shell companies registered out of state. One of them's tied to a roofing contractor investigated for insurance fraud last year. Guess who filed the paperwork? Don't tell me Terry, Linda. But Terry's nephew co-signed. We've got 3 state agencies cross-referencing the financials. It's not just a local case anymore." That explained why 2 unmarked sedans had started parking near the rec center. I thought they were just watching for leftover HOA records. Turns out, they were part of the state's financial crimes unit. The district attorney's office had gotten involved after discovering that over $70,000 had been funneled through inflated contractor invoices and fake emergency maintenance charges. When the indictments dropped, the neighborhood practically threw a block party. Dolores was charged with wire fraud, falsifying municipal records, and conspiracy to misappropriate funds. Linda and Terry were named as co-conspirators. The state froze all personal and business accounts tied to the shell companies, and Marisol confirmed that restitution proceedings would follow once the court cases concluded. But while the legal gears ground forward, something strange started happening. I noticed a drone hovering above my dock one evening around 6. It wasn't the kind you buy for your grandkid. This was bigger, with a mounted camera and what looked like a zoom lens. It hovered for a solid 3 minutes before zipping off toward the woods behind the old Peterson place. The next day, Claudia mentioned that someone had been parked outside her house late at night, engine running but lights off. Another neighbor, Anton, found his mail tampered with, opened and taped shut again. The mail carrier confirmed the envelopes had been delivered sealed. It didn't feel like random mischief. It felt like someone was trying to find out who knew what. I installed 2 more trail cams, one on a pine overlooking the dock, and another hidden near the mailbox. A week later, I had footage of a man in a ball cap and windbreaker opening my mailbox and slipping a phone inside. The guy didn't even glance around, just acted like he owned the place. I turned the footage over to Deputy Coleman, who passed it along to the state investigators. They traced the phone number to a burner registered under a fake name. The signal had been pinging off towers near a strip mall in the next county, same spot where one of the shell companies had a phantom office address. Marisol called me the next day. "The surveillance attempts are part of a broader concern," she said. "We believe there may be someone higher up, outside the HOA, who was laundering money through the association. The drone footage, the mailbox tampering, it's intimidation. And it's not limited to you." She paused, glancing over the rim of her glasses. "Do you own a firearm?" I nodded. "Legally registered, and I've got cameras covering every corner." "Good. The county's assigning an investigator to monitor the situation. Until this case closes, assume you're being watched." The next week, the community mailbox unit caught fire. I heard the pop just before midnight, metal warping in the heat, followed by a brief whoosh. By the time I got outside with my extinguisher, it was already a scorched mess. Fire department said it was arson, likely started with accelerant. Marisol's team rushed in the next morning to collect the melted remains. Turns out, several homeowners had received warning letters in the mail that week, anonymous. No return address, just like the ones we'd seen before. The fire destroyed the evidence before most could turn them in. That's when the county finally took the gloves off. A grand jury was convened. Not just to prosecute Dolores, Linda, and Terry, but to investigate a larger network of contracting fraud tied to several HOAs across the state. The scheme was bigger than anyone expected. Our HOA was just one tentacle of a much larger operation. Marisol confirmed that the lake access scheme was a test balloon. Dolores had been coached by someone on how to falsify plat maps, submit fake easements, and manipulate bylaws to shift property rights. If she'd succeeded, the plan was to replicate the tactic in other neighborhoods. "They weren't after your lake specifically," Marisol said one afternoon as we sat at her rental car's bumper. "They were testing how far they could push boundaries literally. You just happened to be the guy who pushed back." I didn't say anything. I just stared at the water, calm again. No drones, no flashlights in the trees, no strangers slipping phones into mailboxes, but the peace was earned. And it came at a cost. Dolores took a plea deal. She agreed to testify against the broader network in exchange for a reduced sentence, 3 years minimum security, with mandated restitution. Linda and Terry weren't as lucky. Federal wire fraud charges landed them in deeper water. The trial exposed dozens of fake companies, forged invoices, and racketeering connections that reached into regional developers and corrupt permit officers. The HOA was officially dissolved 68 days after the petition was certified. And while that technically made our neighborhood self-governing, folks didn't rush to replace the old system. Instead, we started doing things the old-fashioned way. Anton mowed the common green space. Claudia's nephew volunteered to repaint the street signs. I hosted a monthly fish fry on the dock, open invite. The gate stayed. Not because I still expected trouble, but because it had become a symbol. A quiet reminder that when someone tries to steal from you, lie to you, and bully you into silence, you don't fold, you install cameras. You read every line of your deed, and when they come for your lake, you lock the gate, and you make them pay if they want in. The lake stayed quiet for a while after the indictments. No more drones, no more clipboard patrols. just the occasional osprey and the soft dip of a paddleboard from my grandkids when they visited. But I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Not yet. Too many loose ends had been left dangling, and the smell of something worse still hung in the air like mildew under new paint. One afternoon, Marisol called, not the usual check-in. Her voice had a new edge. "We found something," she said. "It's not public yet. But you need to hear it before the media gets wind." I met her at the county building, a squat tan structure with peeling stucco and more buzz than usual around its doors. She led me into a side office where a younger man in a gray suit stood by a corkboard covered in photos and timelines. He didn't introduce himself, just handed me a folder. Inside were scan permits filed under the HOA's name. But these weren't for gazebo builds or kayak racks, they were excavation permits. Filed under an Environmental Modernization Initiative, the permits authorized soil testing and minor dredging along the lake's southern edge, which, of course, was entirely on my property. The signatures had been forged, but not sloppily. They'd even used a notary stamp that matched a real business in the next county. According to the documents, the HOA had been working with a shell company posing as an eco-consulting firm. "There's a paper trail," Marisol said. They claimed they were running water quality tests to qualify for a conservation grant, but the grant doesn't exist. The state's Department of Environmental Management has no record of it. They made it up. I stared at the permits. What were they actually doing? The man in the gray suit finally spoke. Dumping. Dumping what? Toxic fill. From a construction site 30 miles west. Lead, arsenic, and other contaminants. The contractor needed somewhere to hide the waste. They paid the HOA under the table to accept it. The plan was to dredge the lake just enough to bury the sludge under the sediment. I looked at Marisol. How much? 27 truckloads, spread over 3 nights last summer. I sat back. My dock, my lake. My grandkids swam in that water and they'd turned it into a chemical graveyard. The man in gray laid out photos taken by a whistleblower, time-stamped, grainy, but clear. A contractor's truck with its license plate visible backed up to the lake's edge under cover of dark. A man in a reflective vest guiding the hose. A black slurry pouring into the water, carried by a temporary pipe rigged from a pump system. The whistleblower had been a former driver who'd been stiffed on payment. He came forward after the HOA's financial records became public. Said he was told it was stabilized fill and didn't ask questions until the smell lingered on his boots for a week. County Health has already tested the water, Marisol said. The contamination hasn't spread beyond the southern basin, but it's bad. We've got elevated lead levels and the shorelines showing signs of soil leaching. State Environmental Protection is stepping in. They're declaring it a hazardous site. I pushed the folder away. So now what? I can't use the lake, I can't sell the property. And they did it with forged documents. Marisol didn't blink. We're preparing a criminal environmental case. The contractor's already being indicted for illegal disposal. But your HOA board, Dolores, Linda, Terry, they coordinated it. We've got bank transfers, signed agreements, and text messages from burner phones. They didn't just defraud the neighbors. They violated state and federal law. The man in gray added, EPA's involved now. This is crossing into federal jurisdiction. We'll be pursuing felony charges for willful contamination of a private water source. I stood and looked out the office window. Rain had started to fall, bouncing off the pavement in soft taps. I thought about the kids skipping stones near the reeds. About the herons that nested in the cypress trees. About the fish that had probably died slow, quiet deaths beneath the surface. You can't leave it like this, I said. You can't just lock a gate and walk away. We're not, Marisol said. The EPA's funding a full remediation. They'll dredge the contaminated fill, treat the soil, and monitor the water for 5 years. But it'll take time, and they'll need your cooperation. I nodded slowly. They've got it. The remediation crews arrived 2 weeks later. Hazmat suits, floating barriers, survey stakes like something out of a science fiction movie. They moved with quiet precision, digging out the poisoned silt and hauling it away in lined trucks. They even brought in aquatic biologists to assess the wildlife damage. I signed off on access rights, sat through decontamination briefings, and answered questions from federal investigators with a clipboard of my own. Meanwhile, word finally reached the media. Headline: Local HOA implicated in toxic waste scheme, privately owned lake contaminated. The story went statewide in under 12 hours. News vans rolled into the cul-de-sac. Neighbors gave interviews, some angry, others stunned. Reporters stood in front of the lake with serious faces, pointing to the floating booms and warning signs. Dolores' mugshot aired on the evening news, followed by Linda's and Terry's. The footage of them being led into the courthouse in cuffs played on a loop. They weren't just charged with fraud anymore. The federal indictment included conspiracy to commit environmental crimes, falsification of state documents, and endangering public health. Maximum penalties. No plea deals this time. Claudia stopped by one evening with a pie she insisted was more for morale than dessert. We sat on the porch, watching the federal crew wrap up the day's work as the sun dipped low behind the cypress. "You think it'll ever be the same?" she asked. "No," I said. "But maybe it'll be better," she nodded, pulling her sweater tight. They thought they could bury it, literally, I guess. But in the end, they couldn't hide what they were. The lake took months to recover. The fish had to be restocked. The soil had to be treated and tested over and over. But I stayed involved every step of the way, coordinated with the EPA, walked the site with the biologists, even helped install a new filtration system at the southern inlet funded by a federal grant tied to the cleanup. The gate stayed up, but the sign came down. No more jokes, no more warnings. Just a clean, restored shoreline and a quiet understanding. This place had been worth fighting for. Eventually, the lake was declared safe again. The water cleared. The herons returned. And one morning, I watched my grandson step out onto the dock, cast his line, and wait. That was the moment I knew it was over, not because justice had been served or the ground had been scrubbed clean, but because they hadn't broken us. The neighborhood had survived. The lake had survived, and I had never once handed over the keys. When someone tries to take what's yours, you don't just dig in, you dig them out.